It's kind of like winning the lottery, and I was lucky enough for that to happen, starting with the 1990 season, and then to work with somebody like Herb. At the time, I had no idea how fortunate I was, but that really was a tipping point for me, because Herb was such an iconic figure in this town, and yet he never acted like he was, and he was terrific to me, and the 8 years I had with him were ones that I'll always remember fondly. And he gave me some of the best advice I've ever had in this profession, and because Herb was so well thought of in this community and by Indians fans, it gave you some automatic credibility just by working with him, and that is something at the time you don't realize how lucky you are, but I certainly do now.
Absolutely. And, Herb Score, of course, that era, you guys together still to this day. It always happens, I think, when an iconic broadcaster that's a long time moves on. It's always tough. I always feel for the guys that have to, come afterwards and follow through. And sometimes, even today with Rosie, we've got listeners that still, I understand, but, things move forward. I think you guys, the combination that you have now is fantastic. But you talk about some of the beginning advice that you got right off the bat. I thought it was funny as you recollected the story of you and I believe it was the PR guy for the Indians at the time, talking about the potential for a good season. And Herb listened for a few minutes and said, "What are you guys talking about? This team's gonna stink." And taught you right up the front to be very honest about the projections of a team, but then explained to you how you don't do that on the air. Every game is super important to the person that's listening.
Well, yeah, and how a ball club is performing from a record standpoint can't impact your broadcast. It can't impact the pregame work that you do or the amount of homework that you do. You approach every game like it's the biggest game ever, and if you have that approach, your work ethic will always be there. And nobody saw more bad baseball than Herb did for the majority of his 35 years as a broadcaster with the Indians, and yet that's why he was so highly regarded in this community, because Herb was the one constant through all of those years of change and disappointment and players and managers and owners coming and going. The one constant for Indians fans was Herb Score. And that was a great lesson to be taught.
And you know what? Back end of that, it's of course full circle. Sports is full. Life is full of those full circle stories. What you just said is the way a lot of Indians fans feel about you now, having been so long the voice of the Indians. That constant, that no matter how many players switch jerseys, and I'm sure we'll mention that from time to time, as eras change and go away, that you have become that standard bearer, that one that they go, well, we've got Hammy, and that's an incredible honor you've gotten there. But looking back, I wanted to go back to when you started here. This is, by the way, excuse me if I'm a little ADD here, but this is one of those, I have 8 million questions, so you have to figure out what direction you want to go in this thing, and which is a tribute to all the things you've done in your career. But when you started with the Indians, could the organization already feel the upward swing of things, or was it still in the dark period just before the dawn?
Oh, no, it was still very dark, because, the Jacobs brothers had, bought that ball club in the late 80s and brought in Hank Peters, who, of course, in turn brought with him John Hart and Danny O'Dowd. But, that was just the beginning, and you never know how it's going to turn out, because they knew the only way to build a club the proper way was through the farm system, and that takes time. That doesn't happen in 1 or 2 years. Really, the Indians, back in the late 80s when Hank accepted the job as GM, it was really very comparable to an expansion team. The farm system was awful. The Major League Ball Club wasn't very good, and some of the commodities that you had on the Major League Ball Club wanted out, and you were going to have to trade them. And that had happened many times in the past, and fans had grown very weary of that, and new plans and new rebuilding programs that somebody always brought in. But, Hank and John and Danny, and then later Mark Shapiro. They stuck by that plan, and that was the key, not to waver and not to lose patience, but to be firm in your commitment. And, those teams, the 1991 season was the worst season still in Cleveland Indians history. So I don't think anybody in 1991 with a 106-loss season could envision that in 3 years everything would be different. But it certainly was different with the building of Jacobs Field, and then with that ball club and the plan realizing its potential. It's not very often that you can put something down on paper like the Indians did, have a plan, and really have everything come together at the exact time you envisioned it. But by golly, it did with the Indians, and that led to the glory days now that we look back at so fondly.
Yeah, and you know what you talked about, and I mentioned here about her being very honest and evaluating the teams behind the scenes and stuff. What was that moment driving around or in your personal conversations where you both looked at each other and said, hey, now, this is starting to turn the corner here. We're on the verge of something good here. Do you have a moment, or can you pinpoint a time where you guys got that feeling behind the scenes that this is it?
Well, Jerry, I think we would have seen it in 1993, and that ball club was assembling in Winter Haven, and I'm sure fans may or may not remember, that was the first year that the Indians trained in Florida. For years, the Indians' spring training had been in Tucson, and 1993 was the first spring training for the Indians in Florida. They were, if you remember, supposed to have a spring training facility in Homestead, which is south of Miami and north of the Keys. And then there was that devastating hurricane that came through and literally wiped out Homestead. And so that was no longer an option for the Indians to move there, but they were gone as far as Tucson was concerned. And so because the Red Sox had moved from Winter Haven to Fort Myers, the Indians were fortunate enough to have a spring training site to go to. And, that club assembled with great expectations. A lot of young talent had started to turn the corner. It was going to be the last year at Cleveland Municipal Stadium. And I think everybody thought when we got to spring training, this is going to be the start of a special year. And I think Herb believed that as well. And then we had the incredible boating tragedy that took the lives of Steve Olin and Tim Cruz. And for all practical purposes, that season was over before it ever began. And that ball club played in a fog for about half the year, rebounded in the second half of 93, played better, that second half. And then, of course, with 94 coming, I think at that point, season in my mind, but with the beginning of a new ballpark, you know what? This club now is ready. Maybe the rest of baseball doesn't know it yet, and we'll see if this ball club is as good as we think it is. But I think those were the years where you really felt like it was turning, and even though we didn't get off to a great start in '94, eventually you could see that this was going to be a special time.
I'll tell you what, and you're listening to the Sports Fix, by the way. For those of you tuning in as we go through this interview, J-Rock talking to Tom Hamilton, the voice of the Indians, and you dawn right into that 94 season. It's funny because, we all look at things through our own personal frame of reference, and at that time I was still, I'm trying to remember exactly how old I was, but I was in my teenage years, and I still wasn't, the savvy sports guy that we all turn into when we grow up, and we all know how to coach the teams and run the teams and all of that. And I remember being in the group of people that day to day was just waiting. I assumed that it would be short-term delay when they were dealing with the negotiations, and then of course the season gets canceled. But I was in that group of people just going, all right, let's start playing some baseball here, because the Indians, you could feel it. They were right there. They would have, I think, I don't know what you think, but I feel they would have definitely finished that run there in that 94 season. But the whole season was special from the very beginning, even though the end of it, you talked a bit about that, how when you look back at your memories, still, even that opening game, having a president there, those are things that, how often do those things happen here in Cleveland,
Well, exactly. And it had been a case where, for how many years did we have such a terrible ballpark to play in, and the ball club matched that park. And, there really wasn't anything we could do for it. And so, that was a time that was, I think still a lot of skepticism surrounded the ball club, and whether or not they'd be good enough. And I think the opening of that ballpark really changed people's minds on how baseball was going to be perceived in Cleveland. And I think it also brought you players you never could have gotten before at the old ballpark. And so that was really the beginning of a very special
time. I'm just curious. When was the first time you got to lay your eyes on the finished product that was Jacobs Field? How much before the season? And what were your thoughts then when you just looked around at this sparkling new facility?
I'm sorry, Jerry, you broke up to be a baseball park, but have all of today's amenities. And then Jacobs Field was the second of that kind. And, I think the advantage the Indians had was that you were able to have a unique design that nobody else had and hasn't really been replicated since. Now, there are so many great new parks everywhere in baseball, but the bottom line is that, 20 years have come by, and Jacobs Field, which is now Progressive Field, has certainly stood the test of time, and it is still one of the best ballparks in baseball.
All right, guys, we've only just begun with Tom Hamilton, voice of the Cleveland Indians. How you feeling? You feeling good? You liking it? You ready for some more? Then sit tight. Don't go anywhere. We've got to pay some bills when we come. Oh, that's so cliche. But we do have to pay the bills. So sit tight. Let us do that. And when we come back, more of our interview with the legendary voice of the Cleveland Indians, Tom Hamilton. Trust me, I'm enjoying conducting this interview every bit as much, maybe even more than some of you are listening to it. We're going to continue it with you when we come back on the other side of the break. Don't go anywhere. Tom Hamilton, voice of the Indians, continues next on the Sports Fix.
And now, a very special announcement from the Sports Fix.
Black bears weigh between 200 and 500 pounds. Brown bears weigh between 300 and over 1,000 pounds. Black bears run away from you. Brown bears run at you. When attacked by a bear, simply lie still on the ground and cover your face and head with your hands. When the bear is finished batting you around and mauling you, contact the U.S. Forest Service.
And that was a message from the Sports Fix.
Quick Lane at Valley Ford Truck is ready to serve. With the holidays upon us, make sure to winterize your vehicle before going over the river and through the woods.
Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas!
Have your sleigh in top form with 4 brand new tires. Choose from 13 top brands. Quick Lane at Valley Ford Truck has the low price tire guarantee. Find the same tire at a lower price within 30 days, and they will refund the difference. Improve your fuel economy with the Works Fuel Saver Package. A certified technician will change your oil, rotate and check tire pressure, top off fluids, and perform a full inspection. Quick Lane at Valley Ford Truck is open late Monday through Thursday to serve you better, 7 a.m. to 9 p.m., Friday 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., Saturday 7 a.m. to 2 p.m., and closed on Sundays. They're located just under the 480 bridge on Canal Road in Valley View between Rockside and Granger Roads. Mention the Sports Fix and you'll get a Quick Lane auto safety kit with the purchase of any 4 tires. Quick Lane at Valley Ford Truck is ready to serve. QuickLane.com/Valley Ford Truck.
Sports Fix listeners, do you tweet? So do we. So tweet with us 24/7 at the Sports Fix CLE.
Business owners and professionals, do you want to take your business, your product, your team, your event to the next level? You want to advertise right here with the Sports Fix. Our listeners are among the most loyal listeners, terrestrial or internet. The Sports Fix universe is not only the radio show, but tens of thousands of fans on Facebook and Twitter. Email me, Jerry Myers, thesportsfix@AOL.com. That's thesportsfix@AOL.com. And let me help you swing for the fences and hit it out of the park right here on the Sports Fix.
News break.
Good morning, I'm Bob Picozzi. More than one team emerged a winner. True, Cincinnati clinched the playoff berth, but Denver's 37-28 loss to the Bengals in Monday Night Football also clinches home field advantage throughout the AFC playoffs for New England, with the Broncos trailing by only 2 with 2:41 left.